The San Joaquin Delta of Central California covers more than 1,000 miles of sloughs and winding rivers. It is a land of water that has provided both hostile confrontation during spring floods and economic benefit during times of prosperity. It has provided livelihood for farmers and for those providing services to the farmers alike. It was also the major avenue for travel until the advent of the Depression and World War II. Perhaps the most nostalgic segment of Delta history traversed the period of steam travel on the waterways, an era that still stirs hours of memories by an older generation and is evidenced by the few remaining hulks that are riding along levee banks. Let us then move back in time to an era when steam was king and the river pilot was the town's most revered individual, to study the genesis of the steamboat, its birth, its hour of triumph, and its death on the San Joaquin Delta. It was on November 15, 1849, that steam navigation came to the San Joaquin River in Stockton, California. Under the command of a Captain Warren, the steamboat John A. Sutter heralded her arrival with a thrashing of paddles and a series of blasts from her whistle. Many Stockton residents came out from their homes and gathered at the bank of the river. They tied the John A. Sutter to an oak tree at what later became the foot of Center Street and tossed a gangplank ashore. Always the perfect host, Captain Warren invited the motley group of Stocktonians to come aboard and partake of his modest stock of liquid refreshments. Champagne flowed generously, and if there was a sober male adult in Stockton that night, it was because he had been unable to locate the John A. Sutter. By early April of 1852, there were no less than 7 steamers daily from San Francisco to Stockton, each vessel returning the following day. As the town grew, the trade expanded, and for miles the hot summer air carried the booming notes of steam whistles across the myriad of islands of the Delta region, as sidewheel and sternwheel vessels ran out of the fairways and into the snake-like bends of the river and its tributaries. Rates for travel were at first a carefully guarded monopoly, and as much as $18 was charged for a ton of freight. It was not uncommon to charge $15 for a cabin passenger and $12 for those choosing to ride on deck. Competition among various steamboat owners would eventually bring the price down to an all-time low of 10 cents a head in fare from Stockton to San Francisco. By the year of 1853, the period of individual ownership was completely over, with 2 rate wars and the fierce competition generated by the introduction of larger and faster steamboats. The smaller individual owner was forced out of business. The majority of the independent steamboat owners pulled their boats and formed the California Steam Navigation Company. The California Steam Navigation Company maintained its monopoly on the steamboat service between Stockton and San Francisco for 14 years, until a new sternwheel steamer was launched in Stockton on August 8, 1868. She was named T.C. Walker for her captain and was built expressly as a competitor on the line between the two cities. Her entrance into the Stockton Channel on her first upriver voyage from San Francisco was spectacular. As she approached her moorings near the El Dorado Street Bridge, she fired rockets and Roman candles to celebrate the occasion. The Stockton Daily Independent of October 1st, 1868, however, did not rejoice at the return of competition and mildly wished, "May her brilliant entrance into the harbor be the indication of a long, popular, and useful career." Throughout the 90-year period of steamboat travel on the San Joaquin Delta, two types of steam vessels were used. The first and most common type was the side-wheeler. The second variety of steamboat was the stern-wheeler, which was built in large numbers after the turn of the century. Its use was enhanced by the straightening of some waterways and by the introduction of a device called a dolphin on particularly sharp bends in the river. A dolphin consisted of several large pilings grouped together and placed on one side of the river on a sharp bend. The stern-wheeler would slide along the side of the dolphin until it was positioned halfway between the bow and the stern. The rudder would be turned sharply in the desired direction, and the entire ship would pivot on the pilings and then continue traveling up or down river. In their later years, the steamboats ran at night. You left San Francisco about 6 o'clock in the evening and were in Stockton in the morning with the whole day ahead of you. Then, back aboard as night approached, you returned to San Francisco. Regarded with a great deal of alarm by the crew members of the steamboats were the large groups bound en masse for a convention or a football game, or, worst of all, an excursion of flaming youth of high school age. They were the ones who gave the mates and pursers and stewards a need for aspirin in case lots and made replacements for pilferage and broken windows a real item in operating costs. For the majority of travelers, river transportation was a straight business proposition, plus rest and relaxation en route. For others, a night trip on the riverboats was a cabin room adventure. Interpret that as you will. In the early days of the river trade on the San Joaquin River, the river captain, in many cases, owned his own vessel. He would run it until it wore out, blew up, caught fire, or was sunk. Most of the boats were operated on a shoestring, and the maintenance of a regular inspection or repair schedule was unknown. This was one of the reasons for the number of accidents and explosions that occurred on the steamers. On April 11, 1853, the Jenny Lind exploded on the river off Las Pulgas Ranch, and 31 of her 125 passengers were trapped in the dining room and killed. January 19th of the same year is the day which is remembered for the blowing up of the Helen Hensley. Oddly enough, only 2 were killed. One passenger had the novel experience of being caught by a flying mattress on which he rode, a la magic carpet, through the air to the nearby wharf, landing a bit unhappy but unscathed. The T.C. Walker No. 1, a 175-ton stern-wheeler built by Stephen Davis, served Stockton for 30 years and then blew up in 1881, killing 9 men. So great was the force of the blast that the entire forward superstructure of the Big 2 stacker was demolished. A second T.C. Walker was built in 1885 and was much larger than the first, boasting 702 tons with accommodations for 226 cabin passengers. Commercial trade was, of course, the mainstay of all steamboat lines on the Delta. At the beginning of trade between Stockton and San Francisco, the California legislature solemnly declared that El Dorado Street Bridge in Stockton was the head of navigation on the San Joaquin River. However, they failed to take into account the fact that if a steamboat captain turned off to the right just before he hit Stockton, he could bypass the city, bridge and all, and hit into better than 200 miles of navigable water, right into the center of an up-and-coming agricultural empire. As the years progressed, the steamboat increased in both size and luxury. On June 10, 1892, the Union Transportation Company introduced a new steamer, the Captain Weber. She was considered the fastest of the Stockton steamboats. James Gillis was president of the company. His wife, Sarah, belonged to the WCTU, and because of her influence, the vessels of the Union Transportation Company were the only vessels on the San Joaquin River which did not serve the liquid of Satan. Before she burned, the Captain Weber made appearances in 2 motion pictures, Steamboat Round the Bend with the immortal Will Rogers, and Dixie, where she co-starred in a modest role with Bing Crosby. It was in 1926 that steam navigation on California's rivers reached what may be called its peak, for that was the year in which the magnificent Delta King and Delta Queen were built. Their steel hulls were prefabricated on the Clyde River in Glasgow, Scotland, and then shipped to San Francisco, there to be loaded on barges and moved up to Stockton. At the Stockton shipyard, the 2 steamboats were outfitted with the last word in luxury, 1,837 gross tons, 250 feet long, each with a pair of boilers that carried 225 pounds pressure and 2,000 horsepower compound engines with a stroke of 10 feet. But from the time that the 2 deltas made their appearance, river trade began to dwindle. The commercial interests, the city fathers, the riverboat owners, and especially the San Joaquin River pilots, had long agitated for a deep water channel from Stockton to Suisun Bay. By the year 1925, those interests had joined together in a drive to win federal aid for improved navigation. But they did not seek to restore navigation to the San Joaquin River. Irrigation had drained away the necessary water, hydraulic mining had filled the riverbeds with sediment, and political support was lacking to fight for state and federal appropriations needed to restore and maintain even a minimum of navigation on the San Joaquin. Meanwhile, the city of Stockton had undergone the metamorphosis of growth. A Captain Charles M. Weber had purchased the original site of the town for a total sum of $60 and named the future city Tuliburg in 1844. Gold was the real key to the growth of Tuliburg, and soon after the discovery of the precious metal at Sutter's Mill in 1848, the town became a jumping-off place for the thousands of miners that flocked to the motherlode. In 1849, Captain Weber changed the name of his town to Stockton in honor of Commodore Robert Stockton, one of the heroes of the short-lived Bear Flag Revolt when California declared its independence from Mexico. During the height of the gold rush, the city of Stockton suddenly realized that her temperament had changed from a sleepy little village on the San Joaquin River to a busy, lusty, boiling waterfront town, full of brawling miners and men who preyed on them. But there was another kind of man who came to Stockton as well, men who could see the value of the rich brown soil of the vast Delta region. Beginning with small subsistence farms, the surplus crops grown on them were shipped by riverboat to San Francisco, and Stockton moved from the era of gold to its new position as an agricultural center. Stockton continued to grow as a shipping center. Like all cities, though, it experienced the growing pains of urban decay and renewal, of economic failure and flood, before greater prosperity was realized. By the 1930s, however, the advent of the Stockton Deep Water Channel meant that the city had entered the age of ocean-going freight, and the sleepy town that had once been called Tuliburg took on a new role as a port center for world trade. The corpse of steamboat travel lived on for a few more years. The Captain Weber made the last passenger run from Stockton to San Francisco on Christmas Day in the winter of 1932. The idle steamboats were anchored along the sides of Stockton Channel or at a boneyard in Buckley Cove during the 1930s. The end of 3 such stern-wheelers is a case in point. The J.D. Peters, Reform, and the old Southern Pacific floating palace, the Navajo, were used as part of a reclamation project on Mandeville Island south of Stockton. Heavy flooding in 1938 caused a bad breach in the Mandeville levee and the island filled with water. The 3 steamers were run through the gap and moored their paddle wheels close to a plank sluiceway through the levee, just above the river's level. Their engines were started up and the trio of old-timers, paddle wheels going full speed, but the ships remaining stationary, actually pushed the water out of the sunken island and back into the stream. Pumps finished the job, leaving the 3 steamboats high and dry, and they ended their days as bunkhouses for ranch hands. In November of 1941, the Delta King and Delta Queen were withdrawn from the Sacramento run and were laid up, thus ending some 93 years of passenger service on the California rivers. A buyer appeared from the east and plans were made to board up the windows of the 2 deltas and send them around the U.S. to the Hudson River as a tourist attraction. World War II, however, changed these plans and the federal government took them over for use around San Francisco Bay as troop ships. After the war, the Delta King was purchased by an aluminum company and towed to Kitimat, British Columbia to be used as a bunkhouse for miners. In April of 1959, there was talk of obtaining state funds and buying back the Delta King. But before this could be accomplished, a syndicate of investors headed by John Kessel of Stockton bought the ship and made plans to return it to local waters for reconversion into a hotel and museum. Then later, a Los Angeles-based company that included Max Mortison of Stockton and San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli acquired the historic boat. They also planned to remodel her into a hotel, restaurant, and cocktail lounge and set her up in San Francisco Bay. But a complicated maze of debts and legal cases have prevented this from becoming a reality. The King's sister ship, the Delta Queen, was used as an excursion boat on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers for 20 years and then retired on November 1st, 1968, as the result of a new safety sea legislation requiring vessels to have metal superstructures. Thus, with the passing of the era of the steamboat, so passed the golden era on the San Joaquin Delta waterways. Gone are the shrill, reverberating whistles, the turning paddle wheels, the frequent stops, and the overnight passage to the city of San Francisco. All Today, Stockton is served by a modern port equipped to handle ocean-going freighters. And since opening its doors on February 2nd, 1933, to the first cargo ship, it has done a multi-million-dollar business. Along with the death of the steamboat, another form of river travel is also dying. The cable ferry crossing the river and slough areas of the San Joaquin Delta. Today, only 4 cable ferries are left in operation in San Joaquin County. The rest have been replaced by bridges which require less in maintenance costs and can handle heavier loads of traffic. When these 4 cable ferries are gone, they, like the steamboat, will pass. Only 2 sternwheelers remain on the San Joaquin Delta, as mute reminders of past fame. The Delta King is still undergoing an agonizing death as she rests in the Stockton Channel and patiently waits for her final hour. The old Navajo, sitting on dry land on Mandeville Island, is already dead. Only her unpainted, long-neglected skeleton remains. Once, she was the most luxurious sternwheeler on the Southern Pacific passenger line. Soon, very soon, both these boats will totally disappear and become part of the legacy of the death of the Delta steamboat.